thank Miss Debbie. And what's your husband's name? Doug. He's going to be doing it this morning. Everybody doing good today? Y'all ready to get in the Word this morning? Y'all don't sound very convincing today. Can we get an amen? Amen? Let's open up to the book of Revelation chapter 12 this morning. When we come to chapter 12, there's a shift in focus. Up to this point, the focus has been on what God is doing in the world during the tribulation. All right, when you come to chapter 12, the focus moves to what Satan and Antichrist will be doing in the world during the tribulation. All right, now in chapter 12, you see Satan and the Antichrist. You see them attempting to kill the Jewish people, and you see God amazingly preserving them and preserving a remnant so that He can fulfill His promise to redeem them. Then you come to chapter 13, and in chapter 13 what you see is basically a bio of the Antichrist. Who he is, what he's about, what he's doing, his activities in the world. And I'm going to do something a little different today. Chapter 13 makes chapter 12 easier to understand. When you have a better understanding of who the Antichrist is, it makes chapter 12 make more sense. So we're going to flip-flop these today. We're going to do chapter 13 this morning, and then come back tonight, and we'll do chapter 12, and doing it that way, chapter 12 will make more sense. And I'm going to go ahead and warn you before we start this morning. Chapter 13 of the book of Revelation is few passages have given people more trouble than the passage we're going to look at today. When we started this, I confessed to you that for years I had been running from preaching through the book of Revelation because there were certain interpretations of certain passages that I had not made my mind up on yet. And I had it in my head that once I made my mind up about everything in the book of Revelation, then I would preach to it. And I realized that day just won't ever come if I don't just go ahead and launch into it. So that's what we did. But chapter 13 is one of those passages that I had in mind. I'm going to tell on myself here, but usually for one sermon, I'm 8 to 10 hours in one sermon. This passage we're going to look at today, I've got about 15 hours in it, and 6 or 7 hours I've got into just one verse. If that's any indication of what we're going to be looking at today. There are so many different interpretations about this passage that it will make your head spin. In one of my commentaries I have, this guy, on one verse here in chapter 13, he gives 9 different possible interpretations. Well, it could mean this, and it could mean this, and it could mean this. And then his conclusion was this. He said, quote, "I don't believe any of these are wrong." Well, what kind of conclusion is that? That for me, that doesn't. I like things to be point blank, right? That's how I am. I want it to be crystal clear as to what it means. I'm a firm believer that the Bible says what it means what it says. Amen? I'm a firm believer of that. And I also believe that if you work hard enough, I believe that if it matters enough to you, you can come to the right interpretation of each verse in the Bible. And I also believe that any interpretation that is contrary to the right interpretation is what? It's wrong. It's wrong. Have you ever been in those, like say it's a Bible study group and you're sitting in a circle and someone reads one verse and people, they take turns saying what this verse means to them. Well, to me it means this. The next person, to me it means this. It actually doesn't matter what it means to you. It doesn't matter what it means to me. It matters what it means, period. And it means what it means. Yesterday, I had something happen in our household that I never thought would happen. We moved out not to the country, but to the country. I mean, we're out there. And can you believe Jehovah's Witnesses found us? I mean, we just put up our mailbox the other day and they found us. When we lived here in the parsonage, they would come there. And that really blew my mind because, okay, you live right next to a church. It's a Baptist church. So you know the guy living in the house next to the Baptist church is a Baptist preacher, and you're still going to, and they would come. But anyways, whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, whatever, I always deal with it the same way. On this occasion, they were inviting me, and they may have come to some of y'all's houses yesterday, I don't know, but they were inviting us to something they're doing at the Kingdom Hall Jehovah's Witness church downtown, and were inviting us, and they said, "Would you be interested in coming?" And I said, "Absolutely not." Very politely. And she said, they said, well, can we ask why? And I always say this to them. Whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, I always say the same thing. I always make sure I say it. I said, because you follow and teach doctrines of demons. You say, well, that's kind of mean. That's what the Bible says. The Bible says that specifically and exactly. That they teach, all false religions teach doctrines of demons. Because at the end of the day, all false religions are ultimately engineered by who? By Satan. And so they teach doctrines of demons. And they said, well, why do you say that? And I said, because you teach that Jesus is something less than God. And so one of them said, well, Jesus is the Son of God. And I said, yes. And he's God. And little Will, my assistant pastor, comes up, I guess, to help. And she said, well, you have a son, and you know, he's like you. I bet she said he's a chip off the old block, isn't he? Trying to use a physical illustration to make a point. It wasn't working. I said, listen, Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Which is another way of saying, if you've seen me, you've seen God. Which is another way of saying Jesus is God. And then went on to use another illustration. I said, listen, either the Bible is lying or the Bible means what it says. And that was the end of the discussion. But I don't know how I got on that, but I'm making the point here that I believe that we can come to a correct interpretation of this passage. And I work very hard to come to that correct interpretation, but I'm going to admit this. There are other people who I would say they are very sound in their theology, but they have come to an interpretation that is different from mine on this passage. And at the end of the day, these things are not salvific. It's not going to determine whether you go to heaven or hell. So it's okay that we all don't have the exact same interpretation. But if anybody asks, I'm right and they're wrong. I'm kidding, basically. All right, Revelation chapter 13 and verse 1. When you get it, say got it. All right. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. Now remember, who does the dragon represent? Anybody know? Satan. And the beast represents Antichrist. All right? Now go to chapter, we'll look at this tonight, but chapter 12 and verse 3. Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon. And who is that? Satan. Satan having 7 heads, 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems. Now that sounds very similar to the description that we just saw of Antichrist in chapter 13. What that tells you is that Antichrist will be fully and completely in line with the purposes of Satan. Here's a question that comes up pretty frequently. What will Antichrist be? What will he be? Understand that Antichrist is not Satan, and Satan is not Antichrist. They are distinct from one another. Antichrist is not a force. He is not a spirit. He is not a demon. Antichrist is a human being. He is a person. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 describes it this way. It says, and that man of lawlessness. So Antichrist will be a man. But at some point in the tribulation, Antichrist will be demonized. He'll be demon-possessed. He will not be merely influenced by Satan. He will be under the direct control of Satan. And that shouldn't surprise us. All through history, Satan and his demons have possessed different people at different times for different reasons. One example of that is Judas. Judas continually rejected Jesus over and over. You know, Judas never cared about Jesus to begin with. He was never in it for a saving relationship with Jesus from the beginning. He was in it for what? Money. He wanted the fame. He wanted the money. He wanted the power that would come with, as he thought, Jesus created this earthly kingdom. And that's why John actually says that they didn't know it at the time, but Judas used to steal from their money box. So the guy was all about money. And it says in Luke 22, it says that Satan entered into Judas. At some point in the tribulation, Satan is going to enter into the Antichrist. He will empower Antichrist with his demonic power, which is why Antichrist will be able to do the things that he does during the tribulation. Now here in chapter 13, Antichrist is said to have 7 heads and 10 horns. Is that speaking literally? No, because remember, this is a person. Most people that I know don't have 7 heads or 10 horns. This is speaking symbolically. The 7 heads represent something. The 10 horns represent something. To know what those things represent, here's what we have to do, and this is what we're going to do this morning. We've got to look at some additional passages in Revelation, and we've got to go back to the Old Testament, to the book of Daniel, and look at some of the prophecies that God gave to Daniel. Always remember this: the best teacher of the Bible is the Bible. The Bible will explain itself with itself. So we'll start with the 7 heads. What do the 7 heads represent? Fast forward to chapter 17 of Revelation, and he tells us exactly what those 7 heads represent. Revelation chapter 17 and verse 9. When you're there, say here. It says, "Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are," that is the 7 heads, they are, verse 10, 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. So the 7 heads represent 7, verse 10, kings. And these kings represent 7 different kingdoms. Now, through looking back in history, we can know which kingdoms they were. He says 5 of these kingdoms have already what? Verse 10, 5 of these kingdoms have already fallen. 1 of those kingdoms, he says, 1 is, that is, at the time that John writes the book of Revelation, that kingdom is still in power. And then the 7th one, he says, has not yet come. Now, you look back in history, and we can know which kingdoms these are. First was Egypt. After Egypt fell was Assyria. Then Babylon, then Medo-Persia, then Greece. Those are the 5 kingdoms that have already fallen. All right, the 6th kingdom that he says still is in existence at the time he writes this. Anybody know which one that one is? Rome. The Roman Empire was the world power when John wrote this. As a matter of fact, as he wrote this, he's been exiled to the island of Patmos by Rome, and he is the property of Rome, slave to Rome. And then the 7th one that has not come yet. It is yet to come. It is a future kingdom. This is the final world empire. The last world kingdom that will be ruled by Antichrist himself. And why does it say that he has these as his heads? He has these 7 kings as his heads. Why does it say that? It's just showing us that throughout history, Satan was directly involved in leading and guiding and ruling in those kingdoms, using them for his purposes. It says that these 7 heads have what kind of names? Blasphemous names. Satan used everyone from Egypt to Assyria, Medo-Persia, all of them. He used them to accomplish his blasphemous goals. All of those kingdoms did 2 primary things. They oppressed and persecuted God's people, and they spread false religion. In that way, those kingdoms were blasphemous. So what about the 10 horns? What do the 10 horns represent? He tells us, chapter 17 and verse 12, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast. And who's the beast? Antichrist, for 1 hour. These kings have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So the 7 heads are representing kingdoms that have already been, minus the 7th one still to come. The 10 horns represent 10 kings that will come to power eventually. Notice it says that verse 12, they've not yet received the kingdom. So now with the 10 horns, we're not talking about kingdoms that have already been. We're talking about kingdoms that have yet to be, kingdoms that will come in the future. And it says they will come to power, but they will receive authority as kings with the beast. So it's when the Antichrist comes on the scene that these 10 kings, 10 rulers, their nations will rise to power. But they will be under the ultimate rule of Antichrist. And we know that because verse 13 says, these have one purpose, and they give their power to who? They give their authority to who? The beast, to Antichrist. So what do the 10 horns represent? Here it is. The 10 horns are these 10 nations that will be in power at the end of the world. But they will align themselves under the rule of Antichrist, and in so doing, they will become one giant, massive world empire that will be ruled by Antichrist. Now, to get a better understanding of this, turn with me to the book of Daniel. Book of Daniel. We'll go back to Revelation in just a moment. But book of Daniel, page 1205 in my Bible. In the book of Daniel, it is the year 605. Israel has been conquered by this world power named Babylon. And the king of Babylon is this guy named Nebuchadnezzar. Now, God gives a dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't know what the dream means, and God gives the ability to interpret that dream to this guy named Daniel. And Daniel is able to interpret the dream. Now, in the dream, there is a statue of a man. And the different parts of that statue's body represent different kingdoms that will come to power in the future. All right, these are kingdoms in chronological order. God is saying, I'm going to to show you how sovereign I am. I'm going to tell the end from the beginning. I'm going to tell you the future by telling you about these different nations that are going to come to power and the order in which they're going to come to power. So let's look at it. It's Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2 and verse 31. Daniel 2:31. Daniel says, You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue was large and of extraordinary splendor, and was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. So there's this vision of this statue. And each part of the statue represents different kingdoms that will come to power. Just as an illustration, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to pose like you're a mighty statue. You ain't never seen a statue before? Just look big and strong and look straight ahead, but don't move because you're a statue. Don't switch your eyes or anything. All right, stop smiling. All right. So the golden head is a kingdom. The chest and arms of silver is a kingdom. And the belly and thighs of bronze is a kingdom. You like that, don't you? And then the legs of iron is a kingdom, and then the feet made of iron and clay is a kingdom. All right, don't move. All right, go to verse 38, and now he starts telling what each of these kingdoms are. Well, the first one he tells specifically in the verse 38. He tells Nebuchadnezzar, who's the king of who? Babylon. He says in the verse 38, you are the head of gold. So this kingdom, the first one, is the head of gold. Well, eventually Babylon falls. And then the next one, verse 39, after you there will arise another kingdom inferior to you. He doesn't say what it is here, but we look back in history and we know what it is. It's the chest and arms of silver, which is Medo-Persia. All right? Medo-Persia eventually falls. And then he says, verse 39, a third kingdom of bronze. That's the belly and thighs of bronze. They will come after Medo-Persia, and they will rule over the earth. Now that's Greece. And Greece did rule the earth under Alexander the Great. They had a big-time empire. And then, verse 40, there will be a fourth kingdom. The fourth kingdom is the legs of what? Legs of iron. That's the fourth kingdom. This kingdom will be bigger, badder, meaner than any kingdom in the history of history. This is what it says, verse 40, then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break these in pieces. Now what kingdom is that? That's Rome. Rome was big time. And then after Rome falls, last you have the feet made of iron and you can sit down now, I'm sorry. The feet and iron, the feet made of iron and clay. Now, what empire is that? What kingdom is that? Now, we just said that the legs of iron was who? That's Rome. So the feet are made of iron and clay. So we know at least some of it is, the iron of it is what? Is Rome and clay. So you have this last kingdom. It is a Roman empire, but it is aligned or combined with these other nations. And look at what happens to it When this kingdom of iron and clay comes to power, look what happens to it. Go back to verse 34. This is after he talks about the feet, partly of iron and partly of clay. He says this, verse 34. You continue looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed it. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now what in the world is this stone? Cut out without hands, crushes the Roman Empire. What stone is this? This is the same stone that the Bible says is the stone which the builders rejected. This is the chief cornerstone, the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and He comes rolling into this world and He crushes this Roman Empire. That's what this is prophesying. But let me ask you a question. Has Jesus already come to this world? Yes or no? Now we ought to be past this one by now. Yes, He's come to this world 2,000 years ago. Now when He came to this world, what kingdom was in power? Rome, right? Now let me ask you a question. When He came, did He crush the Roman Empire? Listen, if anything, Rome crushed Him. Seemingly, he was sentenced by a Roman governor to face a Roman execution, nailed to a Roman cross with Roman nails by the hands of Roman soldiers. If anything, Rome crushed Him. He didn't crush Rome. So how in the world is he talking about saying that Jesus comes into the world and crushes this Roman kingdom? Well, look ahead to verse 41. Daniel chapter 2 and verse 41. It says, in that you saw the feet and what? Now just remember that. Keep that up here. Feet and toes. Partly of potter's clay, partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom. It will have in it, and we're talking about this iron clay kingdom. This is the last one that we've been discussing. It'll have in it toughness of iron as much as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. Verse 42. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. So now he gets a little more specific talking about this last kingdom. He doesn't just mention feet, he mentions what? Toes. Now how many toes do we got? Should have 10. So this statue has how many toes? 10 toes. Now remember, the Antichrist is being pictured as having how many horns? 10 horns. Remember what the 10 horns represent. It represents these 10 nations that will arise to power. Then they will align themselves under Antichrist and they'll become one great, big, massive empire. So we come to Daniel and it becomes very obvious. The 10 toes of the statue are the same thing as the 10 horns of the Antichrist. They're talking about the same thing. These 10 toes made of iron and clay are this final world empire ruled by Antichrist. And what is this kingdom going to be? Remember, iron represents who? Rome. And so this last world kingdom will be a revived Roman empire. And it's combined with clay. It has aligned with these other nations. And it becomes this great, powerful empire. But here's the irony of it. Although this will be the most powerful empire the world has ever seen, it will also be the most short-lived empire the world has ever seen. This final world empire will be ruled by Antichrist for about 3.5 years. And then what we just read, what happens? The real rolling stone comes to town. And here's what happens. Verse 44, Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. In the days of those kings, what kings? The 10 kings of the 10 horns that we just read about in Revelation 17, this final world empire. These kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future, so that the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. What in the world is this? This is that stone which the builders rejected, the chief cornerstone. This is King Jesus coming into this world, crashing, annihilating, devastating that final world empire, and then establishing his own kingdom that will last for how long? Forever. Forever. So now, we'll go back to our passage in Revelation chapter 13. Pat yourself on the back, we just made it through the first verse. Revelation chapter 13, verse 2. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. Now, what does it mean that the Antichrist is like a leopard, a bear, a lion? It means he's strong, he's powerful, he's fast, he's wise, he's cunning, he's methodical in how he stalks his prey. But how does he become that way? How does he become so strong, so powerful, so cunning and deceptive? It says, and the dragon, and who's the dragon? Satan gives to Antichrist his power and his throne and great authority. Now that is absolutely horrifying. You take a man who already on his own has an extreme anti-God agenda. And then you place him in a seat of extreme authority, and then on top of all that, you fill him with demonically supernatural power. That is a deadly combination, isn't it? Absolutely. This Antichrist will be insanely powerful. He will have the power of Satan. And remember, Satan is not just an angel, he is a super angel, right? He is on a level above other angels as far as power goes. Satan will be able to, Antichrist will be able to do absolutely anything he wants to do. He will answer to no one, and no human force will be able to stop him. In the beginning of the tribulation, I think you see that the world is trying to stop him, not for moral reasons, but for political reasons. They don't want their nations taken over. They fight back against him. World War III happens. Just this massive world war happens. Leads to a worldwide famine, worldwide disease, and fourth seal judgment. What percentage of humanity dies? 25%. A quarter of the world dead just like that. That's how powerful and deadly Antichrist will be. Then in verse 3 it gets just really wild. Revelation chapter 13, verse 3. Y'all there? Alright. I saw one of his heads, one of Antichrist's heads, as if it had been slain. And his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. Now it's just getting really crazy. If someone is fatally wounded, what does that mean? They're dead, right? They didn't survive. They're dead. Antichrist is fatal. He has a fatal wound, and then it says his fatal wound was healed, which means he was dead, and then what happens? He's raised from the dead. Now let me ask you this question. Have you ever seen anything in your Bible that would indicate that Satan can raise the dead? There ain't a shred of evidence in the Bible that the devil can do that. He would like to do that because the devil always wants to be able to counterfeit God's miracles. But he can't do that. There's only one person that can give life. Go back to chapter 11 of Revelation. Remember when we talked about these two witnesses, these two preachers that come to the world and they can breathe out fire and consume their enemies and all that? And you know, they're killed. And after chapter 11, verse 11, after they've been dead for 3.5 days, it says the breath of life from who? The breath of life from God. That's the only place that life can come from. So, we just need to make that clear because there are some people who say that Antichrist dies and then Satan raises him from the dead. That's dead wrong. Satan can't do that. So, there's only two possibilities. Alright? Either Antichrist really does die and then God raises him from the dead. That's one possibility. But I'm going to tell you, my theology just won't let me go there. And some people disagree with me on this, but I cannot in my theology say that God raises Antichrist from the dead. Here's one thing. Nowhere in the Bible do you ever see God raising a lost person from the dead. Certainly not a lost person who was sold out to Satan. You never see that. On top of that, and to me, here's the big thing. For God to raise Antichrist from the dead, that would mean that God is contributing to the efforts of Antichrist, contributing to the deception of Antichrist in this world, and my theology just will not let me go there. So here's my belief. on what this means. And when I say my belief, I mean the way it actually is. Kidding. If you had to pick one word to describe the Antichrist, that word would have to be the word deception. Other than his master Satan, Antichrist will be the most effective deceiver that this world has ever seen. And what better way to deceive the world than to have a fake death and therefore be able to stage a phony resurrection? We just read he is possessed by Satan. He has the skills, the abilities of Satan. My belief is that with those abilities and skills and powers, he will be able to somehow, some way, deceive the world into believing that he is dead, and then he will stage a false resurrection. Now, y'all, Satan would have it no other way. All throughout history, God does a miracle, Satan has a counterfeit. God does a miracle, Satan has a counterfeit. The greatest miracle God's ever done, raising Jesus from the dead. What would Satan love to do more than to be able to finally stage a phony resurrection? Now, in either case, whether it's that Antichrist really does die and God raises him from the dead, or that he does a fake death and a fake resurrection, the result is the same. It says the whole world was amazed and followed after the beast. And when it says that the world follows Antichrist, follow in what kind of way? Is it just talking about that the world now follows him socially? Like he has more Twitter followers than anybody in the universe? Is it just that the world follows him politically? It's a lot more than that. It's a lot more than that. Look ahead to verse 4. It says, they what? Worshipped. They worshiped the dragon because they worshiped Satan because he gave his authority to the Antichrist, and they worshiped the Antichrist, saying this, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him? Are they asking a sincere question right there? That's rhetorical, isn't it? I'll tell you what that is. This is their profession of faith. The fact that it says that they worship him, it means they are following him religiously. They're following him spiritually. And their profession of faith is, Antichrist is our God. Who is like him? No one is like him. He is the one that we serve and follow and worship. And what is the teaching of Antichrist going to be? Look at verse 5. It says, there was given to Antichrist a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authorities to act for 42 months was given him, 42 months being the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. And Antichrist opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. This is going to be arrogance and pride like we can't even imagine. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4 tells us that it's at this point in the tribulation that Antichrist, listen to this, takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Antichrist is not saying to the world, I'm like God. He is saying, I am God. Antichrist looks at God and says, you're in my seat, move over. And he preaches to the whole world that he is God. He's just like Satan, isn't he? Remember, Satan rebels against heaven, causes this mutiny in heaven. And it says in Isaiah 14:14 that Satan said, I will make myself like the Most High. He's just like Satan. He will be declaring, preaching to the whole world that he is God. And as far as what he'll be saying, it says he'll be speaking blasphemies against God, and he will do that incessantly. Daniel 7:25 says that Antichrist will speak out against the Most High. Daniel 11:36 says Antichrist will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. Think about this, for thousands and thousands of years, Satan's just fury and anger and hatred towards God has been burning and smoldering and growing. Now, to some degree, he has been able to release that hatred, vent that hatred into this world through false religion. But that's only in a measure. Well, when Antichrist comes to power, when he opens his mouth, it will be like giving a megaphone to Satan. Antichrist will be the unrestricted mouthpiece of Satan, and he will spew out hatred, blasphemy against God for those 3.5 years. And the crazy thing is, the world's going to love every bit of it. Other than the saved people, they're going to enjoy it. They're going to worship Antichrist through it. And not only is he going to assault God's name, he's going to assault God's people. It says, verse 7, it was also given him to make war with who? With the saints. That's tribulation saints. That's people, Jews and Gentiles, that have been born again during the tribulation. And this, verse 7, is what starts back in the fifth seal of judgment, where there's this massive slaughter of unbelievers. Now, I want to wrap it up in this way. You know, when we started this, I struggled with wondering, God, is it okay for me to do something like this on a Sunday morning when we may have people that start coming to church that, you know, they're not Christians, they're not saved. You know, can they get the gospel through these things? And it's like every week, I see the gospel over and over and over. If you're here today and you're lost, and when I say lost, what I mean is, Jesus may be in your mind a part of your life. Hey, you know the Bible, you say prayers, you go to church, you try to be a good person, you try to do the right thing, you believe in God, but Jesus is not the Lord of your life. If that's the case, you are lost, because Romans 10:9, it's when we confess with our mouth Jesus as what? As Lord, then and only then can we be saved. So if you're here and you're lost, and when you hear me talking about these lost people in the tribulation that are going to be worshiping Antichrist and following this false religion that blasphemes God, you may hear that and say, man, that's awful, that's terrible. I would never do such a thing. I would never follow a religion that lifted up Satan. Well, I want to ask you this question. Are you sure that you're not already doing that right now? These people in worshiping Antichrist, who were they actually worshiping? Satan, right? In the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul is talking to some Gentiles who, in the worship of their false gods, they were offering sacrifices to their gods. And this is what Paul said. He said, the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they actually sacrifice them to demons, not God. In other words, you may think you're worshiping your false God, but in reality, in worshiping your false religion and your false beliefs, you're actually worshiping Satan that is behind those false teachings of that false religion. So, any religion, any belief system outside of biblical Christianity is from who? It's from Satan. Any belief system outside of biblical Christianity is satanic. Now, if you're here today and you're lost, chances are you have bought into the false religion engineered by Satan called salvation by works. There was a time in my life when I had bought in to the religion of salvation by works. It's one of the oldest lies Satan has ever told, that you can be good enough to earn your way to heaven. This is where you basically say things like this. You say, if someone was to ask you, why do you think God would let you into heaven? You would say something like this. You would say, well, I'm not perfect. I don't plan to be perfect. But, I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. I go to church. I know some Bible. I pray when I need to and things like that. And, I try to be, I'm basically a good person. I mean, I think my good outweighs my bad, so therefore, without question, when I die, I'm going to go to heaven. That is one of the biggest lies Satan has ever told. That you can be good enough to earn your way into heaven. The Pharisees followed that religion. And you know what Jesus said to the Pharisees? He said to them right to their face, he said, you are of your father, the devil. Showing that religion is a demonic, satanic religion. So here's the thing, and listen, I know this may offend you. But we don't determine truth by how it makes us feel, do we? We determine truth by what the Bible says. If you're here this morning and you're trying to climb into heaven by some other way than faith in Jesus Christ, then according to Jesus, you are of your father, the devil. Now, I'm going to tell you, there was a time in my life when I had bought into that same lie. I really did think that, I'm not perfect, but I'm a good person. I'm good outweighs my bad. And I did not believe at all that God would send someone like me to hell. That just shows I had bought into the lie. I was in the grip of the father of lies, Satan. But the best day of my life was when that stone that we talked about, that I had rejected for so long, it came rolling into my life, and Jesus saved me right then and there on the spot. But I can remember the first time someone shared the gospel with me. I can remember thinking to myself, that sounds good, but I can't yet because I got to clean my life up first. I'm doing these bad things and those bad things. I'll stop doing those things and then I'll come to Jesus. And I finally realized that's backwards, ain't it? You don't clean yourself up before you come to Christ. You come to Christ and He cleans you up. You don't work to the cross. You work from the cross. And you may be here this morning and you say, you don't know me. You don't know what I've done. You don't know where I've been. Hey, I don't care. Because God doesn't care. It doesn't matter who you are, where you've been, what you've done. It doesn't matter what you're doing in your life right now. As a matter of fact, it doesn't matter what you were doing or where you were at last night. What matters is right now, if you are willing to give your life to Jesus Christ, He will save you instantly right there on the spot. It all comes down to are you willing to do that. Father, thank you for this time that you've given us together this morning. Lord, I just ask you that for those that are here this morning that are lost, they may know about you, but they don't really know you. Lord, I pray that you would remove the blinders from their eyes, that their hearts that for so long have been so calloused, that you would move upon them so that they can feel and sense the conviction of the Holy Spirit, that they would see their need of you, that they would realize how Satan wants to devour them, but that at the very same time Jesus has made a way. I pray that right now they would give their lives to you and be saved. And we thank you for it in Jesus' name.
Number 317. 317. Let's stand together.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Anybody else? And thank y'all for being here today. Thank you for being the church that you are. I want to ask Brother Heath if you'll dismiss us.